So my name is Melanie Blood. I have been the coordinator for Ideas That Matter for 2 years now. I'm going to introduce each faculty member as they prepare to speak. We have several quite new faculty members, so I wanted to make sure you all meet everybody who is presenting today. So our first presenter, also, for those of you online, on my screen, I will put their PowerPoint up. So if you are online, you'll want to take my window once I change it from the lovely close-up on the flags to the presentations, and just thumbtack that so you can see the presentations. Our first presenter is going to be Dr. Peter Kalenda, who is an assistant professor in the School of Education, here just beginning his 2nd year. Dr. Kalenda has spent the past year leading a group of SUNY professors on a study of pre-service teacher perceptions of generative AI written lesson plans. They have presented their work at the Online Learning Consortium's Innovation Conference in Denver, Colorado, and the SUNY Conference on Instruction and Technology. I can guess some of that. His AI research will expand his to include students' abilities to generate and revise generative AI prompts for lesson plan writing. Do you want yours on this then?
Sure, yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay, let me just share it first. I'm just going to share the screen. Oh, okay. They should now see this. Okay, but you can also learn this and then they'll see it.
Okay, should I do full screen? Can I?
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Sure.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming on a Friday. I changed the title of my presentation the other day while I was preparing because I realized what the work I did shifted with this audience. So today we're talking about helping students to see that generative AI is a very useful tool when doing many tasks, but there are flaws that they need to be aware of. So my agenda today in the 10 minutes I have is to share with you how I got started using generative AI, what I did this past year with my students here at Geneseo, and then what I did to turn that into a module that you could use as an educator if you were interested. So in the summer of 2023, there was a lot of buzz about generative AI. A lot of it was rooted in fear among educators because many of us were scared about how are our students going to use this? Is it going to replace them doing assignments? Will they not then build the skills we need them to build as future individuals in whatever career pathway they're choosing? And so I was curious what that looked like in the realm of education. At first, I was resistant to being concerned about it because my students at the end of the course have to write a really complex lesson plan. There's a long list of things they have to do. And I didn't think generative AI could accomplish that with what I had heard about so far. So I was sitting at home, I was with my husband, and he wanted to help me build a prompt to actually see if it could do it. So we put in all of the complex things that my students are tasked to do in an education course. And I was waiting to see the outcome, and he showed it to me, and surprisingly, I was very shocked with the outcome. At first, I looked at it, and at every component that I was asking my students to do, I was genuinely concerned for a minute why I even had a job. And then I started to read it. I looked a little bit closer, and I learned quickly that although it looks great, it did do all the tasks I asked it to do. There were a lot of things that were just complete fiction. It made a lot of stuff up. And there were also a lot of gaps as well. It didn't actually have the skill set needed to complete many of the tasks, so it gave something, but it didn't always make sense. So I decided I needed to start working with my students with this technology because it's growing in the field, it's growing in all fields. And I wanted them to be able to recognize it not as a replacement, but as a tool that they could use, and I wanted to help them figure out what are its strengths and what are its weaknesses. But I didn't want to tell them directly what those strengths and weaknesses were because, as we know, learners don't always listen to what you tell them. I wanted them to experience it themselves and walk away with that own learning by doing. I also did this as an approved IRB study so I could share it at conferences in the past year. Fortunately, this aligned really well with my course. My students were learning to become future childhood teachers and get certified in New York State. And there was already an existing student learning outcome in the course where my students were responsible for evaluating existing curriculum. So instead of having them evaluate curriculum produced by a company, I asked ChatGPT to create a bunch of lessons, and they evaluated those instead. So this is a short version of a long list of things I asked my students to make sure are in their lesson plans. By the end of the course, they need the skill set to do all of this. They have to be able to write a STEM lesson plan that covers multiple days. They have to use a very specific learning model, a learning progression that helps them write inquiry-based lessons that are based on curiosity and questioning. Use actual children's storybooks to merge literacy into the work that we do. I could go on, but I won't get into details here. Just keep in mind that these were the complex tasks that not only students have to do, but I am now posing ChatGPT to do as well. I converted this into a prompt for ChatGPT to create. This is what that looked like. So I had to use actual New York State learning standards and put this into a prompt that ChatGPT could translate into a lesson plan. And then the students were given the lesson plans. Every group of 2 students were given a unique lesson plan, and they were tasked with going through and analyzing it. I created a structured order of things that they had to look at, so they were actually looking into all of the required pieces of the lesson plan. And then they had to decide what the strengths and what the weaknesses were in each of those areas, and then write a reflection at the end to their future self years from now. When they are an educator, how would they use this as a tool so that they could reflect back on that? What were the findings? So many of the students were really surprised, similar to me the first time I did it. Some were kind of like they knew this, they used it, but the majority hadn't used it before. Some of those students are here today. I won't hold call, but please raise your hand if you want to chime in and share anything. The students were very comfortable critically analyzing lesson plans written by a computer. However, whenever I previously asked students to analyze peers' work or something written by a curricular company, they were really hesitant to do that because there's a lot of concern there of what can come off, especially not as someone who's certified. So it was nice to see a pathway for me to offer an opportunity for critical analysis that was safe. The students' overall opinions regarding generative AI decreased the more and more they went through the process and started reading everything. And then students found in general that it couldn't write a detailed enough lesson plan for a substitute. It could only write on an outline level. So they identified it more as a nice starting point and not as a way to actually create a tool, create a lesson plan. I have a student quote to share with you. We have learned that generative AI can be a successful tool in creating outlines of a lesson plan. In contrast, however, many times these lesson plans are incomplete or contain information that can be fabricated by the AI itself. With this, we should use this tool to help in our planning endeavors, but always make sure to add personalized data after this outline is completed to ensure that all students meet the learning objectives and have an equal opportunity to do so. In spring 24, I continued this work, but I added in an extra piece where I now tasked those same, with this new group of students to go back to that prompt. Now that you are aware of the drawbacks of generative AI, what if I pose this question to you? What if the generative AI was actually capable of writing an amazing lesson plan, but I wrote a bad prompt? Take some time and revise the prompt and see if you can get it to make a better outcome. They were also allowed to go to other websites, such as Google Gemini, Magic School AI, Microsoft Copilot, and again, a lot of them had fun playing with all these, and some of them found that other websites, especially Google Gemini as a tool, was better at making lesson plans than ChatGPT was when they first started. So that brings me to the Ideas That Matter module. So I was talking to Alexis back when she first asked me to consider doing this, and I wanted to make sure I created a module that all educators could utilize, not just education professors. So I got rid of the lesson plan approach and shifted everything to just making a class presentation. So no matter what content area you are, you could pose that your students are responsible for creating a class presentation on any content area. You as the professor could make you as the teacher could make all of the different lessons, and then students read the presentation that they are being tasked to give in the classroom. But then they have to critically analyze it and improve it to make it better before it's actually delivered. The module has 5 subcomponents to it, so you as an educator can pick the parts that are relevant to you. The first part is having students analyze that presentation, asking them to summarize the strengths and weaknesses of the presentation that they're going to give, having them engage in prompt engineering and revision so that they get better at using these tools themselves to make better presentations, doing the revision, and then actually, if you want to, you can have them deliver the presentation to the class, and in that presentation include them sharing out what they found the experience to be and what the strengths and weaknesses were. There are handouts to help you if you would like to use them. There is a pre-post survey if you would like to have them engage in reflection before and after, or if you would like to use that for your own research. There are sample prompts and sample lesson plans that were created by ChatGPT. There are sample guidelines to guide that critical analysis through the lesson analysis process. And lastly, there is a handout to teach them how to engage in prompt engineering and revision if you would like to go that far with your students. That's everything. 9 minutes.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you. Our second presenter today is going to be David Levy, who is professor and chair of philosophy. He's incorporated discussion of and occasional use of generative AI applications in his ethics courses. And once, I like this part a lot, having been a philosophy major myself as an undergrad, I would have had fun with this. He once had students in his ancient philosophy class use an AI-powered art generator to produce portraits of fictional pre-Socratic philosophers. I love that. All right, I'm going to unshare because he's got power back first. So. Oh, wrong, sorry, wrong one. Yeah, we're going to do this one. Okay. Go back and share again. Did that go? I think it did for you. So, yes. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Please do pay attention to the formatting of the slides. There's a point. Okay. All right. So I'm David Levy, professor chair. I think the first time I've done something like this where I am the elder statesman, which is unnerving. I discovered earlier today that my dog is regarded by the vet as an older pet. I still think of her as a puppy at 9, and now I have to think of myself as an older faculty member. I just wish my TIA craft were caught up to that. All right, so encouraging student reflection on the ethics of generative AI. I'm going to use this as kind of my anchor through the discussion, right? Every pedagogical choice we make, including whether or not to incorporate generative AI, should be guided by the course learning outcomes, which those should be connected to program learning outcomes, and those should be connected to baccalaureate learning outcomes, and those should be connected to the institution's mission, vision, and or values. Right? So this is not something just to be done for the sake of, it's cool, let's try this stuff out, right? But there should be a purpose, and as instructors, then we should, of course, intentionally remind our students of that purpose. Here's why you're doing it, so on and so forth. Okay, so the first brief example, when, why, how I did this goes back to fall 2022. There wasn't yet much attention being paid to ChatGPT, but there was this kind of explosion of interest in these AI art generators, right? And I had come across online an essay topic for ancient philosophy that a recently deceased philosopher had done some time ago. Her students were kind of posting memorial notices, and a couple of them remembered this particular example. I had just given my students their first essay prompt in the ancient philosophy course on the unit on the pre-Socratic philosophers. And I thought, I like that prompt, I like that idea, I'll incorporate it and add something to it. So the prompt was to use their knowledge of the full range of pre-Socratic philosophers to fill in some of the gaps and create a fictitious philosopher. Right? How might we have gotten, what else might have happened to get from this philosophical view to this other philosophical view? Do what the ancient chroniclers did, write a biography of this geographer, connect it to what we know about geography, trade, connect it to what we know about transmission of concepts, write fragments or later testimonia, right? Sort of do all this stuff. And again, no ChatGPT, so I got no concerns about that. But then, as often happened, create a portrait, right? Like ask the AI art generator to create a marble bust of this philosopher, or create a 17th century oil painting, right? And it turned out it was horrible at it, right? I can't remember, there was a student who wanted to sort of add a view to the corpus of pre-Socratic philosophy that really emphasized the role or the value of the sun, right? Kind of a later idea that Plato and the Neoplatonists did, but let's see if we can find it earlier in the pre-Socratics. So try to do something and get some kind of incorporation of aspects of radiance or sun rays, and it was just like, okay, here's the sun. Right? Kind of like superimposed over the face. It was dreadful. Again, this was not just an in-the-moment snap decision. In a sense, it was. I modified the assignment after reading these memorial notices. But there really is a learning outcome for the course that relates to the glow, creativity, and innovation. And so I thought this was it fit within that, and I explained that to the students. And again, it was one of several topics they had to choose from. Not many did. They were concerned about, this is a philosophy class, how am I going to be graded on my creativity? But anyway. All right, so enough of that one. Now, the real example. And I did create an Ideas That Matter module. It's not as well developed as Peter's, but it's there, and if you want, you can find it. This is the first time I've been teaching our 100 level ethics course, I think ever, but if not, then surely for a really long time. And so I approached the whole course as a new prep. We had recently overhauled our entire curriculum in the philosophy department. We had new programmatic learning outcomes, several of which relate to reflection on planning, goals, practical aspirations, right? Trying to present the idea to our students through our curriculum that philosophy is actually the most practical of all the disciplines. It's okay to laugh at that. We might believe it. It's great if you do. I don't have much work to do then. And so I approached the development of my syllabus for ethics by centering issues, topics that speak directly to contemporary student concern and experience. So instead of the kind of good old-fashioned approach to teaching ethics, here are some historically important normative theoretical frameworks. Now let's pick a few kind of well-trod examples. Let's instead get at the theoretical stuff by talking about the ethics of ghosting, or of student activism, or of environmental concern, right? And it turns out a Geneseo alum by the name of Bob Fisher had recently edited the second edition of the text that does that for you, called College Ethics. So throw a bone to the former student as well. Let him get some royalties. The ethics of that. So in that anthology were readings that prompted students to think about, to reflect on what the value of higher education is, how it relates to longer-term planning, how it might relate to the pull they feel to remain true to their cultural expectations, their familial norms, right, that sort of thing. And then also, helpfully, an essay on the topic, Is Cheating Wrong? And I thought I can use this stuff to create a unit that invites students to think about why they're taking an ethics class, why they're pursuing higher education, why they should be constrained by certain things like rules that say don't cheat, and then incorporate use and thought about generative AI. Oh, by the way, there's also recently been an essay in the Chronicle of Higher Ed written by an undergrad at Columbia, serving as a wake-up call to all us faculty. We have no idea what's going on. We have no idea how much their use there is of ChatGPT, right? So, okay, I woke up and I wanted to do something with this. All right, so don't know that I said all that, but good enough. All right. All right. So first part of the unit, consideration of the aims of higher education. We used an essay written by Martha Nussbaum from the University of Chicago, Education for Citizenship in an Era of Global Connection. Nussbaum develops an argument around the idea that the aim of higher education is to develop ourselves as both humans and as citizens in particular, who are going to be expected to participate in deliberative democratic citizenship, but where that now must be understood as necessarily global and interconnected. Okay? So lots of opportunities to talk about how Nussbaum's claims relate to Geneseo's values and the Connected World curriculum. So the Connected World curriculum in terms of global awareness and engagement, diversity and pluralism, communication, in particular communication across difference, that sort of thing, right? She argues that we really need to understand education as aimed at cultivating certain kinds of traits or virtues, as opposed to simply transmitting knowledge. For example, the capacity for critical examination of oneself, of one's traditions, the capacity to see ourselves as bound to all others, the capacity to exercise what she calls narrative or moral imagination. Put yourself in the shoes of others, so on, right? Okay. So a question that we considered in class discussion of this is the use of generative AI to assist with the completion of assignments compatible with what Nussbaum identifies as the aims of higher education. I'm not going to tell you a damn thing about how that conversation went, right? But sort of that's how we can use a kind of important topic early on in a semester on ethics designed around the student experience as participating in these institutions of higher education these days, how we can get students to think intentionally about that kind of stuff. Next, we address the ethics of cheating, and so we turn to an essay by Matteo Bouville, Why is Cheating Wrong? Bouville's essay is not an argument that cheating is not wrong. Instead, it's an essay designed to show why a lot of the reasons we might give probably aren't as strong as they are, and so encouragement to kind of continue to reflect on it, refine our reasoning, not give up on our attitudes and our norms, but engage in an ongoing critical reflection. Okay? So we can think about the wrongness of cheating in terms of the fact that it violates rules, or the fact that it has a tendency to produce bad consequences. You get caught. It's unfair, right? That sort of thing. Or what it tells us about the kind of character you are. What kind of person would engage in cheating? What kind of person would substitute, right, the work of someone else for their own? What does that tell us about the character of the person? Right? We go through this, students develop an understanding, and now here's the prompt. Is cheating wrong if the assignment amounts to nothing or little more than busy work? If it's not connected to the learning outcomes of the course? What are the aims of higher education? How is everything we're doing in here intentionally connected to those learning outcomes, right? Get students to think about whether under those circumstances, there might be reason to think cheating is not wrong. Like, not like it's less bad, but like, you know, you got permission because the instructor has shown such utter and complete indifference toward what should matter. Yeah, won't tell you how that discussion went, but that's the prompt for it. Finally, the essay from Owen Kachisu Terry, the one that appeared in the Chronicle. I'm a student who have no idea how much we're using ChatGPT. The nice thing about this is that if you really are new to it, if you really are uncertain about ways in which ChatGPT can use, Terry does a really good job of cataloging a wide range of uses, going from, you know, you might think students are just putting the prompts in and the essay is written. But no, right? Like the more common use is, I have to write an essay on this topic. Can you generate half dozen potential thesis statements? Okay, now, can you help me outline the essay for thesis statement number 4? And can you help flesh out, right? So it's this kind of generative, developmental sort of thing going on. The kind of stuff that we as instructors are not going to be able to detect at the end, because the student is doing some work just at an earlier stage is substituting ChatGPT for it. So I ask the students to consider whether in that context, using ChatGPT is cheating. Lots of interesting conversation, lots of interesting discussion, which leads then to writing. All throughout this course, I have students engaging in lots of low-stakes writing assignments. And I'm giving them different instructions for each one. Series of them, you're going to do it outside of class, you're going to submit stuff in Brightspace, and I'm just going to ask you, please, please, please don't use any generative AI. A couple you're going to do in class. You're not going to get the prompt ahead of time. I'm going to give you a piece of paper. You're going to bring a pen or a pencil, and I'm going to give you half an hour. Don't worry about spelling, it's low stakes, or like no stakes, right? Just write. And then for the ones in this unit, the direction is you must use ChatGPT. I'm not going to say how. I'm not going to put a limit on how. I'm going to tell you, in fact, if you want to upload the prompt, print it off, turn that in, fine, just document it. Like, just tell me that's what you did. You want to do it for parts of it, fine, right? Just highlight that stuff, document it. It's the documentation, that's the important thing here. But it's an invitation to use it so that then we can reflect on it. Okay? Here's the actual prompt. When completing the brief writing exercises in this module, you were required to use ChatGPT in some way or other. On earlier assignments, you were prohibited from using it or any other tool. Take this opportunity to consider the value, positive and or negative, of using such tools. What, if any, benefits were there to using them? Difficulties were there? What did you learn about the difference between appropriate and inappropriate uses? What would you consider to be an appropriate policy for a college or a course like this one to adopt concerning the use of such tools? They turn that in, and then we have a class day of discussion of all of this stuff. Okay? Here's some of what the students wrote. When using the AI feature ChatGPT, I did not have a greater sense of learning. In other words, I didn't connect with the questions better because AI was helping. I felt like I was not broadening my understanding and working to become a better learner. And that's the point of college. I didn't realize how dangerously easy it is to acquire loads of information instantly. It took me much quicker than it usually would. And that's where it becomes a problem. By the way, the ChatGPT there, that's the typo in the student's original. These are unedited. That's where it becomes a problem. A student could just take their use out of proportion, just copy and paste, and it's inappropriate to do that. It goes from a tool to a cheating machine. The more you use it, the less likely you are to think for yourself. In my opinion, I think it can really hinder your academic growth and progression. My experience with the assignments more focused on the final grade rather than the engagement I was having with it. And then the representative positive one. And this is a balanced representation, right? I had 30, 35 students in there, and like 80 to 85% of them came away from it going from like horrified to thank you, now I understand why I should never use this, and then the rest of them were, there's some positive value here. So here's a representation of that. I've grown more comfortable with my use of ChatGPT because of the open and honest class conversations we've had about it. I've determined that not only is it a wonderful tool to use in essay writing, something I believe should be integrated into more and more academic spaces, or at least a version of it that includes all the benefits and none of the possible forms of misuse that comes with it. That's a student, by the way, who likened it to his pastime as a Dungeons and Dragon, what do you call it?
Dungeon Master.
Dungeon Master, right? And getting hard. Put some ideas into ChatGPT, and it helped with thinking about how to build the map and so on and so forth, right? And so he came to see the value of it in that kind of way. All right, that ends the substance of the conclusion. Did you do what I asked? Did you pay attention to the formatting of the slides? Did you notice anything about them? Like even how random or otherwise? I used the AI tool within PowerPoint to make recommendations for the layouts of each of these. I have no idea how it hit upon Pretty Leaves for the first one, but I went with that one. And then the guiding statement is a diploma. First brief example, I'm not quite sure what that is. Real example is balls that bounce off each other. I like the little stupid icons. Nussbaum's claims became a nice little double helix molecule or something like that. Cultivation, so we've got a plant there. Yeah, right.
The higher education of black box.
That's right. So, move it, why is cheating wrong? I like that little emoji face there. So, you know, I had a little bit of fun with this and poking fun at the use of generative AI for some stuff.
Thank you. Our next presenter will be Leighton Smith, who's a professor of English, teaches poetry, especially in relationship to ideas of citizenship, the environment, and digital writing. He is a poet and translator from the Icelandic. His current course, Poetry, Prompt Engineering and AI, traces a connection from the experimental mid-20th century, correct me when I mispronounce this, Ulipo?
You're good.
All right. School of Writing to contemporary uses of AI to generate poems. Thank you, Leighton, for joining us.
Thank you, Melanie and Alexis, for the invite, and to colleagues for fantastic presentations, and all of you for being here on a Friday, including hello to the folks on OWL. I'm going to talk about the when and why of AI in writing-intensive contexts, and I'm going to think, rather than presenting a single assignment, I'm going to try and think on a sort of slightly more programmatic level here. I'll talk about the course a little bit first. So AI and prompt engineering. It's a course in which students are analyzing contemporary poetry. They're also composing poems in concert with AI, but also a number of different prompt-based writing structures. And poets love a prompt. What is a sonnet other than a prompt? You've got 140 syllables. You've got 14 lines. You've got a rhyme scheme, right? Constraint is one of the things that produces art. There's a high degree of reflection in the course, right? That they have to, students have to think about what got produced when I was engaging with a prompt, right? The Ulipo school uses random prompts. Take a word, take the 13th word on in the dictionary, that becomes the word in the poem, right? Either tools for creativity or tools for reflection on what our meaning might be. The other aspect of the course is it's thinking about questions of access to the internet and the computational. The scholar John Keane has pointed out that there is no archive of black digital writing, not one. And he pointed that out 10 years ago, and there is still no archive. And if you search for his essay, it comes up in a mention on our institution's web pages, but not in many other places, right? So there is a gap here. Lillian Yvonne Bertram, whose work we study and has produced a really fascinating book of work in concert with AI, has pointed out the fundamental whiteness of the internet and the fundamental whiteness of the content of ChatGPT and other large language machines. And so to some extent, the course is asking to act as a corrective to that, to think through whose words we're reading and when we are reading those words. And so students are engaging with the course on those levels. It's also an online asynchronous course, right, which presents some different challenges because we don't get to have the kinds of conversations that David has richly talked about. And one of the reasons it is, there's a lovely metaphor that the writer Louis Menand has, borrowed from the French, which is writers are defined by l'esprit de l'escalier, the spirit of the stairs. So you know you're a writer when you pass somebody going up the stairs, they're coming down the stairs, and when you get to the top and they're at the bottom, you've thought of the perfect response. That's what makes you a writer, right? And so for a group of students, they have thrived in these online asynchronous courses because rather than being there in the moment and saying, well, I have my reaction to the text right now, right here, I will give it to you, the ability to read the text at a different time of day, respond to it at a different time of day, is opening up considerations of text for them. And so it's been a really rich environment to be in. But it's also had me thinking about questions of how I'm designing my classes. One of my early mentors in the composition program at Columbia University, where I got my first experience in teaching, would say to us, why this particular prompt for this particular group of students at this particular point in the semester? So as professors and as students, we're always thinking about prompts, right? Why are we doing certain prompts? What are they hoping to achieve? And that's one of the key topics of understanding artificial intelligence. Dr. Callender was making this point very eloquently earlier. We're thinking about how we give instructions to an AI or how our students are doing this and what comes out of that experience. And for those who haven't come across the term, this definition is kind of useful. In order to receive the best output, you have to structure a prompt so it can be properly understood by the AI. engineering prompts to provide contextual knowledge as well as to be as descriptive as possible ensures that the AI will understand your goal. And there's a nice riff on what it means to be a writer as well, right? If we take AI out of that equation, we start thinking about the reader, right? Writing is this magic trick because you write something, it's come from inside you, you're connecting via this medium of the page, which might be the web page, and it's got to resonate with somebody who's not there. William Wordsworth talked about it as the spontaneous overflow of powerful emotions recollected in tranquility, and that kind of recollection has to be the recollection of somebody who didn't have those ideas or experiences in the first place. Right? So part of where I'm going with this is that although we can get caught into the question of does AI mean that the writing has to be tested before it is read, I'm wondering if it's actually going to throw us into a consideration of what counts as writing itself, right? And why we proceed with writing, how we understand it. I want to point out that when writing about their book, A Black Story May Contain Sensitive Language, Lillian Yvonne Bertram says, in addition to recommending some readings on the ways that there is computational bias, determinism, and anti-blackness in technology, she also says that they also said that they do not see my work as trying to eliminate bias in LLMs, but to explore and manipulate their biases. I've come to see fine-tuning as a process of biasing or using the model to do what it does best. And fine-tuning is where you give it a large language model new language to work with. So in Lillian Yvonne Bertram's case, she takes ChatGPT, which is inherently producing these various stereotyped stories about Black experience. She feeds into it Gwendolyn Brooks's poetry and gets this really interesting first-person-led subjective writing about what it might mean to think about Black optimism by adding more language in. So the work that Lillian Yvonne Bertram is doing, the work we're studying in the course, is thinking about how we might engage with AI not as the opponent, but as some kind of collaborator in the process, right? Now, in order to try and get there, I came up with some pedagogical prompt engineering steps. I'm going to design this course with these principles, and because Geneseo loves an acronym, I had to make an acronym, so the word STEP is there. So I want to be specific to the text being analyzed, right? So I want to make my prompts kind of model in some way what the text we're looking at is doing. That might mean that if we're looking at a poem and it's looking at lineation, I'm asking the students through the prompt to think about, say, fragmentation or something. Timely to the stage in the semester. So why are we doing this work at this point in the semester? Early on, I have the students analyze by annotating together on Google Slides. And so they are putting text box of annotations up around a poem, they're reading each other's annotations, they're commenting on them, they're seeing how other people are doing the same task, right? Exact in its language, because I think one thing we're looking for, and I think, Michael, you were talking about this with the use of the word delve, right, which is one of my favorite words, and I don't want to lose that word, right? It's a Seamus Heaney word too, so we definitely don't want to lose it. But can we work out when delve is the right word, right? What's that context, right? And can we model in the prompts the exactness of language? And that leads into the practices, models of specific skills students need to achieve learning outcomes. So it is learning outcome connected, and it's explicitly learning outcome connected. I was quite happy with this, but in practice, it didn't lead to writing that was always communicating what I wanted the writing to communicate, right? And so that had me thinking about, is there, even in a prompt that's really detailed, all of my prompts involve asking students to quote at least 2 different moments in the text with citation, there's still writing that I was reading and thinking, I don't understand as a reader, right? And there were moments where I was thinking, is this an AI? And that's not a question I want to be thinking, because that's taking away from the question of how can I help with your writing? What can be my role as a commenter? And I was also very mindful of these statistics that come from Janelle Shane, who's the author of the Common Read book this year. So many of you students will have read this from Janelle Shane's wonderful AIweirdness.com blog. That, in fact, so often when we talk about AI as something that students might be using and penalized for using, we're actually inherently already at a moment of inequity, right? We're already judging certain students in other ways. And one reason I started teaching the prompt engineering course is because there's some interesting research out there that the best funded courses of the Ivy students get to study courses in prompt engineering and earn 6-figure jobs, and at state colleges, students get chucked out of college for using AI, right? And there's no studying of prompt engineering. And so the question is, how can we think through, as colleagues have so smartly done today, the uses of prompt engineering? And so I wanted to leave us with questions then, rather than solutions, although I think we're taking some steps towards solutions. And one is the question of what is writing for and what's the right writing at this moment. And we've seen some models on this, and I'm also mindful with David here that Plato was the one who told us not to do writing, right? Plato would say that writing is the fundamental tool for forgetting. So Plato would have one answer. But I've kind of gone down a scale here where like sometimes we want to write just to record or notate or to have a memory device, right? And sometimes we want to write to demonstrate or share knowledge, and this partly speaks to what Michael was saying about BS, and when is that writing a demonstration, right? What's being asked? When do we want to write to rewrite or shift the perspective that we collectively hold, and that's Lillian von Bertram with the biases and correcting biases. When is writing exploratory and experimental, and we can try something out with ChatGPT or not, right? And see it as pushing towards uncertainty rather than certainty. And then finally, the one I think is really important, writing is thinking or processing with the deliberate riff on the fact that we call computers processors, right? Of course, that word comes from human beings who were the human beings operating the computers, but there is a collaboration, I think, inherently there. I think we're making some fantastic steps. It's great to have Dr. Claire Jackson on faculty directing the first year writing seminars and that visibility for writing. And Dr. Papu, a colleague in English, has done some wonderful work with Beyond Standardized English. But I wonder if we can do more to center the writing that is being written by students at the college, right? We've got things like the Proceedings of Great Day. I'm taking the model of where I came from the composition program at Columbia. We were starting to build a journal of composition publication, which is now this fantastic website of student essays that are then inherently taught by faculty to students and are setting the model for publication. So I think there's ways to think about how public we make writing. And I want to sort of test out the fact that we do have some departmental writing requirements here, right? And the word require, if we go back to the etymology, one who requires something stands in need of something, right? We lack it in some way. But at the root of it, there's that sense of asking for or searching for something. So can we think of that departmental writing requirement less as requirement for students and more as opportunity and possibility for students? And so what I want to leave you with, because I know I'm at my 10 minutes, is that the Italian writer Salvatore Quasimodo says that poetry is the revelation of a feeling that the poet believes to be interior and personal, which the reader recognizes as his own. Substitute writing for poetry here. I'm not going to be precious about poetry at this moment. But we might associate writing and poetry with the emotions. But feeling here doesn't just have to mean emotion. It doesn't have to not mean ideas. And that sense of believes to be. When we write for somebody else, we want them to think in the ways we are thinking. And if we can encourage ourselves and our students to be doing that, to have thought on the page through writing, I think that's where AI becomes a collaborator or not a collaborator, but we're outside the AI versus human and into the how is writing thinking for writers and readers. I'd love to have further conversations. I'll have to apologize because during the reception I'll be off teaching a workshop on poetry, but I'd love to hear from people and talk further to people. So thank you for listening today.
Thank you. Do you want to quickly say where that workshop is in case anyone cares to join you?
Yes, if anyone cares to join me at 4 o'clock, it's in the Gallery Lounge in MCU. It's the first of 2 workshops on writing poetry with AI, and part of the point is to learn what do we expect about poetry rather than just let's let AI take over writing our poems.
Thank you. Cassie Fenn-Stoke is next. She's assistant professor of psychology and has been conducting research that either harnesses or interrogates the promise of digital tools to promote mental health outcomes for the last 12 years, and have applied the framework and experience to the task of exploring how AI can be used ethically and effectively in the college learning environment since she arrived at Geneseo just over 1 year ago.
So extensive research, basically, on that topic. Okay, it's such an honor and a privilege to be a part of this roundtable, and I feel like all of the presentations that have come before really highlight something that I want to hit home, which is about the extraordinary positionality of being in the liberal arts environment and having multiple perspectives, multiple theoretical approaches to thinking about this topic and how best to harness it. And so it's really my privilege to bring a kind of psychology bent to that. So my goals for this talk are to first consider the affect, the emotion we are bringing to this topic on this campus, and what I have been picking up about those vibes, both across faculty and administration and my students. Think about the promises and the pitfalls of using AI as a tool, both as an instructor and as a learner, and really differentiating the promise of AI when used as a tool from the pitfalls of AI when it's treated as a standalone brain, when it's treated as a standalone psychological entity, which, spoiler alert, it is not. Then thinking about how we promote literacy as a learning outcome among our students and how they use artificial intelligence and large language models in the college setting specifically. So above and beyond just learning from childhood, but really, who are we meeting as college students and what do we want them to get out of the college experience? How can we make them literate citizens in a growing digital world? So where I come from does matter here because this is the perspective I'm bringing to this topic. I am a clinical psychologist. What that means that is in the broad field of psychology, I'm interested in mental health, promoting mental health and trying to diminish psychopathology. And I focus on resilience factors. My lab, the PRISM lab, that acronym was designed by ChatGPT for me because psychologists love acronyms and PRISM was pretty and it ended up working with the kind of topics I was interested in. I'm really interested in the social contexts of recovery from psychological problems, and I'm interested more broadly in a thematic aspect of mental health, which is when we approach, instead of avoiding, topics that inspire fear and or anxiety. Okay? I have a lot of relevant research experience in technology. One of the first projects I ever worked on was building a text messaging intervention for people who wanted to cut down on their drinking. This was met with a lot of anxiety from clinicians who felt we were building something that would take away their jobs. We have looked at demographic differences in social media usage and how what Facebook was in 2007 is not what Facebook is today. What Google was in 2012 is not what Google is today. And more recently, the impacts of doom scrolling in COVID-19. These are some of the publications that I've worked with collaborators on. And right now, I am in the process of building and teaching a class called Psychology of the Digital Everywhere. Have you ever heard anything more liberal arts than that? And it is about the fact that we now live in a world where technology is ubiquitous. Not only is it ubiquitous, it is a prerequisite for being here. You cannot be a student here without a laptop. You need to access Brightspace. You need to be able to engage with a PowerPoint presentation. And you need access to a phone for security alerts, campus alerts, and one of many other types of things if you are going to be successful on this campus. That's aside from all of the social elements of what the Digital Everywhere is providing to students and faculty alike. So what are the vibes when we start to talk about this new digital tool we have access to? I've noticed a lot of negatively valenced emotions, a lot of anxiety and trepidation. And this is not just among my colleagues, and it's not just among administration. I feel a lot of fear from my students. When I say, somebody open ChatGPT and put this prompt in, I meet a lot of resistance from students, fear that even though they're getting an explicit instruction from an authority figure to do that, they could get in trouble for doing that. Frustration from faculty, especially about, did I just spend 4 hours grading things that weren't even written by my students in the first place? How am I going to navigate a world where this is what my students are putting out for me? A lot of secrecy and shame around how AI is being used. And again, that's not just among students. It's also among faculty. So I'm going to be as transparent as possible. I am using ChatGPT all the time. And I'm really thinking about it in the historical context of how much resistance Google met with when that first became an information processing tool, and how much resistance Wikipedia met with when that became a resource for finding sources, primary sources, for learning about a topic, right? Times are changing. And so the secrecy and shame around this inhibits our ability to have discourse about it. It's why I think it's so great that we're doing this topic this year. But there's also so much curiosity, and I think that that's really what this talk is about. Curiosity is, in my mind, kind of the birthright of the liberal arts environment. We should be curious about how to use this technology and how to use it smartly and well. Now, AI chatter is driven by a fear-based media discourse, right? That is a part of some of the conversations that we've already been having today. And it's also coming from our anecdotal and shared experiences. Well, my colleague put their students' papers into a ChatGPT thing to see if there was AI in there, and there was. That creates immediate fear. It creates immediate anxiety. And there's a problem with that, right? When the valence is negative psychologically, we know that all animals will avoid. We will not engage with things that induce fear and anxiety. This negative messaging leads to a lack of understanding of what the strengths and weaknesses of the tool are. And that means low literacy, both among the teachers and the administration and among students, and a limited capacity to intervene when you feel that AI is being used in a way that is unhelpful to learning, okay? We are actually beautifully equipped to approach this topic, right? Meet this moment with the tools of the liberal arts environment, engaging Socratically with this. When I say Socratically, I mean what I do with clients in a cognitive behavioral therapy session. Let's assume we have no idea what the right answer is, and let's start to ask questions and see what happens. Let's think critically about what this can do and what the quality of the output is. And thinking critically it isn't necessarily just tearing the thing apart. I think that sometimes our students think critical thinking is being handed a resource, a reading tool that we've handed them, and then finding all the things they hate about it. That's not what critical thinking is. Critical thinking is about really developing an organized opinion based on your own context and your own experiences about what you're interfacing with, and doing so socially in this environment. And then adapting our pedagogy to meet the moment. So here are some basic things that I think we should all know about large language models. They are not calculators. Large language models are very bad at math, as a matter of fact. And so if you ask it to do basic mathematical things for you, it will give you an answer, and that answer will be wrong, okay? They are also not conscious. They are not brains. They have no sense of ethics. They have no affect, right? They are pulling from pre-existing and biased sources. And those sources are corporate entities with corporate interests. They do not share the learning goals and the overall mission of an academic environment like this one. But they're adaptive, they are learning from us all the time, and they do effectively synthesize many domains of information that are useful to us. The caution here is garbage in, garbage out, right? The more information on a topic is crapola, the more likely that's going to be the outcome you get in a ChatGPT model, right? And just like Google, just like Wikipedia, we are not going to be able to stop this from happening. Just like that Columbia student wrote about, this is here now, and so we have to approach quick with it, and we have to adapt. So when we think about the promises and the limitations that we're faced with here, we can do more with this as instructors and as students when we think about this as a tool for our own approach coping, okay? That means if a student's using it to avoid having to generate an idea themselves, that's neither good for their learning nor their mental health. When we are using it to avoid really doing creative lesson planning and design, that's not good for us either. but nor is avoiding the tool completely. When it performs preconceived organizational or editing tasks on our creative work, it does an amazing job. When I tell it, I want a worksheet that is looking at these things in this way, it can create that for me. And let me tell you, as a second-year assistant professor, I can't even imagine how many hours of my life I've gotten back because ChatGPT was there to be used as a tool to help me limit my own bullshit work, my own busy work, and let me think at a higher order about how I wanted to engage with my students. It's also pretty good at summarizing and clarifying existing language-based information. The important thing to remember here is you need to be expert enough to know if that synthesis is correct. So when I say to it, what are the DSM-5 symptoms of PTSD? That happens to be an area I know really well. It is pretty good at giving me that information, synthesizing that information for me quite well. But I'm also expert enough to know if there was something in there that was wrong. AI works against us when we conceptualize it as a person with a brain. And that means that when we ask it to perform higher order cognitive tasks that require idea generation, it will do the best it can. It wants to say yes to you, but it is not going to provide the same quality content that an ethical, philosophical brain grappling with its own existence is going to give you. And it is not good at understanding, thinking, or reasoning, performing cognitive tasks for the user. It is good at generating information and responding to your creativity if you are bringing that to it. So in course prep, this can do a lot for us if we think about the benefits and the strengths and how you can leverage it. When you have the expertise and you want to distill information down, this is a nice tool to do that for you. When you want to think about how to update your content, let's say you're thinking about, okay, I kind of knew the prevalence rates of this thing 7 years ago. Where are we at now? It can point you in the right direction for those things. You will have to check its sources, but it can point you in the right direction for updating content. And it is useful once you have done the creative work of knowing the types of tasks and activities you want your students to do for developing outlines and worksheets and class activities, but not providing that information itself. Okay? Here's an example. So in my research methods class, I have students grapple with various pseudosciences. They're having to understand the difference between true science and pseudoscience. And so I asked ChatGPT, I had already had the idea. I want students in different groups to handle different pseudosciences. You guys are going to do phrenology. You guys are going to do mewing and whether that improves your jawline. And you guys are going to do horoscopes, right? I knew exactly what I wanted it to do, and so I gave it the prompt to create a worksheet like this. And it did, and then I edited it, and it was in good shape. Now that probably saved me about an hour of work, being able to leverage ChatGPT. But you will notice that the idea was mine, the framework was mine, and I was bringing my own expertise to that, so I could edit it effectively myself. Now, in research settings on campus, AI actually has some really great functionalities. I use R code for my statistics, and AI is great at editing my R code. If I'm getting an error in R, I can plug and play and ask it, what is wrong? And it's a useful troubleshooter, and it's a hell of a lot nicer to me than some of the men on the chat boards, right, for R code. And it's also useful in helping break down statistical concepts for students. When a student encounters terminology in a paper that is overwhelming and makes them feel stupid or ill-informed, they can copy-paste that in and get an effective and well-defined definition. So what I would suggest to all of us is let's approach COPE with this topic. Let's play around with it. Ask it about a topic you understand deeply to start off. Ask it conceptual and philosophical questions and fact-based questions and see which it's better at giving you. Ask it to do a time-saving task for you so that you're not doing the bullshit work yourself, and incorporate it into Socratic activities in class that allow students to form their own opinions about what it's good for. Once you understand it, then you can set policies around it and you can set expectations for your students. That's it. Thank you so much. I hope to have an opportunity to chat with you guys.
Thank you so much. This is so interesting to me. I hope you all are interested as well. I know we have run late, and a couple of people really have time commitments, but we have one more presentation and then a few questions in our reception. Javier Velasco is new to our campus this semester, so welcome. He is in our Global Languages department. He has been an instructor of Spanish languages, literature, and culture for 9 years in the United States. His interest in AI applied to language instruction stems from the need to find ways to make Spanish language learning more effective and engaging for both students and teachers. He's participated in several courses on AI specifically applied to language instruction, with the most recent being a course held last summer at the University of Chicago Language Center. Thank you. Now, if you just unshare, and then you should be able to share. So for those of you online, I'm going to stop sharing, and then Javier is going to share. So you may need to change which screen you're watching. You can't share? Oh, I need to enable your share. I'm not sure how to allow you to share. Anyone know more with Teams about how I can enable someone else to share? Do you know how? Yeah, please. Just go wild with my computer. You're faster than me. Is somebody sharing?
We've got ChatGPT up.
Right.
That would be a great application, is an AI, like Teams or whatever, so you can just say what you want it to do and it does it.
Yeah.
But I don't see Microsoft doing that. They're too busy stealing all of our arguments.
Working for you?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you. You got it. Great.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I have my notes, so I'm going to be quick. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here. Like many language teachers, my interest in technology began a while ago when I was trying to convince my students to resist the temptation of using that arch enemy of any language instruction, Google Translate. Many students were using this tool to translate their writing. The technology was doing pretty much all the work, and the translations were the final product rather than the medium to achieve improvement. I realized that the problem was not technology itself, but among other factors, the need for me as a teacher to rethink my assignments, considering different motivations and goals for my students. Cheating is often a symptom that the students do not understand or value the reward of completing the work themselves. And this is very human, actually. The more unpleasant and uncomfortable something is, the more we need to understand the payoff. For a language instructor, it's crucial to further clarify what we want the students to learn, why it is valuable, and especially why the effort and discomfort required are necessary. And as about Bowen and Watson state in their book, Teaching with AI, this is about psychology, actually, not so much technology. It's about finding new ways to increase student motivation and then technology and use technology to be our assistant in this process. This author explains how humans are more motivated by three internal drives summarized as I care, I can, and I matter. While applied to in the classroom, the last two, I care and I matter, refer to the clarity of instructions and the student's desire to feel that their voice is heard. Today, I want to discuss the first aspect, the I care. According to Bowen and Watson, the I care in the classroom refers to purpose. All creatures have this an internal detector. Is this activity worthwhile, or should I be doing something else? So I want to use this minute to show some examples of how AI can be helpful in showing students the skills they will gain in a language class, and how they will be able to use and apply this knowledge in meaningful ways. Every language is full of phrases, sayings, and colloquial expressions. Indeed, the linguistic richness of a society lies in how, historically, language has been adapted and modified to reflect a collective identity. Understanding this goes beyond simple translation and can be a window into the sensitivity of a different linguistic community. In a classroom, AI can be useful in granting knowledge that bring the student closer to that experience of cultural proximity. For example, a Mexican slang that I love is no manches. This expression is widely used and has powerful cultural reach in the Spanish language, even beyond Mexico. If you use Google Translate to find out the meaning, this is what you will get. Google Translate is going to do like a direct translation. So manchar, it means to stain. So, but that is not correct. It's not accurate. So AI can help you make the experience more enriching. And instead of forbidden translator, I'd rather teach my students to create a prompt for better results. So using in this example ChatGPT, I created for my classroom a prompt that says the following: act as an Spanish tutor for novice high college students. For the Spanish expression no manches, provide a simple explanation in English, cultural associations of this word in easy Spanish, synonyms with translations, and 3 simple sentences that include this expression in simple Spanish with English translation. So it's super important to teach, to guide the student on how to prompt, because like the secret behind AI is prompting, actually. And so it's important to be clear in that we need to assign a role to the AI, and then to provide context, and to be very clear in what we are requiring AI to do for us. So the answer of ChatGPT in this case is very complete, actually. In a simple explanation in English, the expression no manches is a common Mexican slang phrase that roughly means no way, or are you kidding me? It is used to express surprise, disbelief, or even frustration in a casual, non-offensive way. And then it's providing in simple Spanish, and Spanish that is appropriated to the level of my Spanish class, an explanation about cultural associations. It pretty much is saying that you can use this expression in a fun way, an informal way, and not being aggressive when you are doing that. But also is telling that it's informally associated with young people, so probably you don't want to use it with your grandma or something, right? Then it's going to provide some synonyms for the students to have like a cultural context understanding that expressions and languages are not about simple translation, it's not unidirectional, so it depends on the context. So the same expression could mean different ways depending on which situation you are using. And then it's going to provide some simple sentences that my students can easily understand, right? So for example, no manches, ganaste la lotería, no way you won the lottery. I ask my students to write as a final activity their own sentences using the information provided, or to incorporate this expression in a conversation. The result will be a student developing their linguistic ability, but also their cultural proficiency. This knowledge within a full cultural context is more meaningful because it gives the student real-life tools and can be useful when traveling, exploring, doing business, or simply when sitting down to watch a Mexican telenovela. I realized that this was more engaging than a vocabulary class, for example, when I taught this in my former institution, and after like the class 1 week later, I was in the classroom telling my students that today we're going to have a surprise short quiz, and the response from my student was, "No manches, Javier." Another example relates to vocabulary instruction. Traditionally, vocabulary teaching in Spanish has been memoristic and repetitive, often disconnected from students' interest. Typically, the vocabulary for a chapter is presented in a class, and at best, students use this word to describe objects or situations. However, merely descriptive language is limited. It lacks long-term impact. Consider, for example, how literature captivates us. A great poem or a novel stays with us because it activates language through superpower, which is the ability to create and imagine words, not just describe reality. Right? Technology can be used in that sense. Sorry about this. Okay, there it is. Technology can be used to enhance this dimension in language teaching. For instance, I use a text-to-image AI generator in my lesson plan for vocabulary about the city in a novice high-level Spanish course. After introducing the vocabulary and conducting brief comprehension exercises, I ask the students to work in groups and write about their ideal city. So they will use words like, with translation, ciudad, city, skyscraper, rascacielos, buildings, edificios, gardens, jardines, public transport, transporte público, and so on. After writing their paragraphs, I introduce them in the AI to have a graphic example of what they wrote. The paragraph I will show you comes from a previous experience where my students wrote this, and I'm going to read just the English translation. They did it in Spanish. Generate the image of a small city. The city has no skyscrapers, only small buildings with gardens on the walls and rooftops. The city has a lot of public transportation, such as buses and trams. There are dog parks and green spaces. For some reason, they love dog parks. People walk and use bicycles to go to work because the streets are small and easy to walk. So this is what AI is going to generate for this group. And they, working in group, they are going to choose the image that they prefer, for example, this one. And the activity concludes with the groups presenting their creations to the class, adding an oral language production component to the activity. More importantly, vocabulary becomes meaningful when it empowers the students to pursue their interests and critically address their needs. In this specific case, with this specific group, advocating for greener cities with fewer cars and environments that are more friendly to pedestrians, animals, and overall life. In a more advanced approach, and this is the last example I'm going to show you, and for higher level courses, we can apply the same concept, the power of language to create words, in a way that engages students through play and imagination. We enjoy watching and reading stories because they transport us to worlds we can understand and control. This provides a sense of security and stability, and it's fun too. While our students have vivid imagination, they often lack confidence in using language to explore that creativity, largely due to the media constant bombarding of images and information which can turn us into passive observers of reality. So this is one of my favorite toys. This AI is called Character AI. It functions in a similar way than ChatGPT, but it has like a different design. So for example, in this AI, you can actually interact with fictional and historical characters, from Abraham Lincoln to Sasuke Uchiha, from the famous manga series of Naruto, right? So for example, last week I was interacting with Diego Maradona. the famous Argentinian soccer player, and I was asking Diego Maradona, the AI, of course, why did you use your hand in that famous and controversial soccer game between Argentina and England in the World Cup 1986? Yeah. So I was interacting. It's super good to do like this kind of role play. But it has some other functionalities. For example, this specific GPT text adventure game is designed for like helping you to construct a story. So it's going to present a setting and a specific context, and then it's going to ask you to interact, to provide answers and clues to both like construct like a story that could go like pretty much anywhere. It's about your creativity and imagination. And the good thing is that this works perfectly fine with Spanish. So, for example, I asked, can we play in Spanish? And the answer was in perfect Spanish, pretty much. So I don't have the audio activated right now, but also has an audio function. And I am not advertising this site. I am just saying about the positive things that it has. So it allows like a different, for the students with different cognitive abilities, to like, not to read, but to listen. And just to close their eyes and start imagining the context and the setting and start creating their own stories and interact. So I haven't tried this yet because I am like exploring and trying myself, right? But I think this is a really good tool that I wanted to show you. Just like in my earlier example where language becomes the means rather than the end goal, this one would allow students to tap into and play with the creativity dimension of language. And that gives sense of purpose for using language in meaningful ways. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. All 6 of our presenters, all of you who have stuck with us and listened to this fascinating group of ways in which we might use AI in our pedagogy. And as many of you have echoed, I am so kind of deeply aware of the interconnections among people's presentations and of how much this kind of inquiry that we're doing together models what I love about the liberal arts and about teaching at Geneseo. And I thank you for sticking with us this long. We will take just a few questions now, and then a few from both the chat and the room. And then we'll move downstairs for our reception. So if anyone in the room would like to get started with a question, then I will just pull up our chat here and make sure that I'm following what people are interested in online. Alexa,
I'll start.
please,
So,
yes.
So it could be for anyone, but I'm actually particularly thinking about how people feel about AI. And my approach is we've been using AI forever. Like, when Google first came out, you had to literally decide, was it a good link to actually click, because it wasn't necessarily a good link to click, and figure out where to go and all that stuff. So have you found there's a little bit of a, I don't know if it's a laissez-faire, but it's like, we've been using it, so what's the big deal?
I feel that way, but I think part of that is because of something generational, which is, has anybody here heard of digital immigrants and digital natives? It's essentially an idea related to language that when you grow up around this technology, it isn't quite as scary. When you're immersed with it and you experience it, you understand what it's good and bad at. And it's interesting, actually. I was talking to somebody recently who said, Google's gotten worse. Actually, recently, it went through a period where as you're talking about, the first link you weren't sure you should, right? Or could click on without bad things happening to your computer, right? Then we went into this era where the top hits were the most informative. Now we get a little AI blurb and whatever is the most paid sponsored link to click on. So we're having to adapt to the fact that these are designed by corporate entities at all times. Now, we can think of that as like, gosh, this sucks, and it does in many ways from an academic perspective. but we are also developing literacy in navigating information finding in a corporate and capitalist system. And so in that way, I think we can think about this as an empowering model for learning how to be literate with it. And I think we're getting there. I really do.